Coming up next on This Week in Computer Hardware, don't overpay for your next CPU cooler and don't use mayonnaise on it either. Frame rating, Eyefinity versus Surround and multi-GPU configuration. Hawaii goes 28 nanometers, an awesome $99 case from Corsair, Haswell, Chromebooks, a Nook we want, and damn, is that A7 fast, people. It's all coming up next on Twitch.
Netcasts you love.
From people you trust.
This is Twit.
Bandwidth for Twitch is provided by CacheFly at CACHEFLY.com.
This is Twitch, This Week in Computer Hardware, episode 235, recorded September 19th, 2013. Overclocking with Mayonnaise.
This episode of This Week in Computer Hardware is brought to you by ProXPN. ProXPN is a virtual private network that allows you to use the internet the way it should be, anonymous and unfiltered. For 20% off your new account, go to proxpn.com/twit and use the code TWITCH.
Welcome to Twitch, This Week in Computer Hardware. I'm your host, Patrick Norton, and this is the show on Twit where we try to bring you the most important, most useful, and most insightful news or analysis of news. Basically, it's hardware here, people. CPUs, GPUs, motherboards, memory, power supplies, and yeah, we dabble with tablets, and we're probably going to talk about the A7 processor benchmarks this week. Right now, though, it is time to introduce the man surrounded by monitors. LCD flat panels to be exact, several of which are running at 4K. Mr. Ryan Shrout, founder and chief hoo-ha at PCPer.com.
I'm going to put that on my business card next time I get those printed, actually.
Chief hoo-ha.
Chief hoo-ha. People are asking what that means. I'll say, I don't know. Ask my buddy Patrick. I'd rather not discuss it.
Could be a baseball reference. Could be a completely random synapse firing. What is not completely random is the results of the latest frame rating test coming out of PCPer. Eyefinity versus Surround single and multi-GPU configurations. Ryan Shrout benchmarks until his eyes fall out of his face. Yeah, that's the face of a man that's run one too many frame rating benchmarks. You seen him in your sleep yet?
I see the results of them in my sleep quite often, just like people who are angry or people who are glad that they're there. It's a good mix. It's a good mix. That means you're doing something right.
Yeah, when they can't argue with your testing methodology or what you're showing, but instead just want to argue about the fact that you're testing it at all.
Right.
Okay, so January 2013, you reveal the new testing methodology for GPUs, essentially the frame rating system. Quote, at the time, Ryan was only able to talk about the process using capture hardware to record the output directly from the DVI connections and graphics cards. Over the course of a few months, started to release data and information using this technology. February, the first results are done. And then your testing proved that AMD Crossfire was not improving gaming experiences in the same way that NVIDIA's SLI was. Then you brought in Fraps and started to go all kind of crazy. If you want the full backstory on frame rating, what it tests, Frame Rating Dissected, it's a story up on PCPer.com. We'll walk you through basically what Ryan is measuring and attempting to prove vis-a-vis the cooperation of multiple GPUs hurling pixels at your screen. Hi, I'm the guy that does the oversimplification here on Twitch.
It's not oversimplified. It is a very complex topic that when you're trying to discuss verbally needs simplification most of the time. But what happened? So when we did all those tests since the beginning of January through now, which is it's still September, right? Yeah, is we were really looking at single screen results: 2560 by 1600, 1920 by 1080p. That kind of stuff. And we tried to measure Eyefinity and NVIDIA Surround. Those are triple panel configurations, most commonly now 5760 by 1080, which is three 1920 by 1080p panels that you set up around you. And it's a very popular high-end enthusiast gaming display option. And the issue I had was that Eyefinity was even more complex and different than single display Crossfire results. And for a long time, I didn't know how to interpret them. We didn't know how to read them. And we didn't really know what we were saying. We had to change a lot of stuff. So it has been months of kind of build up to this where, okay, we feel like we've covered all the GPU genres, all the price schemes in the right way. And we've done everything we need to do. Let's move on to this other problem we couldn't figure out. And now we are presented with Eyefinity versus Surround. And what happens is actually maybe the most interesting point, the most interesting page in this article is the third page, where it's called discovered problems with Eyefinity. Because the issues that frame rating first showed, the idea of runt frames and lower observed actual frame rates while you're gaming, as opposed to what something like Fraps reports, is separate than what we see with Eyefinity. They're related, but they're very separate problems. Instead of getting runt frames, what you get are either dropped frames completely, where you don't even get a portion of that frame on the screen. You are getting none of it. So the game engine computes it, sends it off to a GPU. A GPU renders it, but it's never actually displayed on the screen. So that's a drop frame. We see that maybe 50, 60, 70% of the time in our testing with AMD Eyefinity plus Crossfire. The other issue we see is the next image down is called Interleaved Frames. And this is where you're seeing these kind of weird color intermixing on it. So the overlay is supposed to be a solid color, and then the next solid color, and then the next solid color. You should not see this kind of fuchsia yellow, fuchsia yellow, fuchsia yellow, fuchsia pattern. That indicates that there's something else going on. We're not 100% sure what it is, but it's obviously some kind of visual anomaly. And if you look at the image below that, you'll see it's from Skyrim. If you look on the right-hand side of that picture, you can clearly see that you're seeing portions of multiple frames interleaved on top of each other. There's a vertical post that you kind of see in the background, and you can clearly tell that two parts of that are actually ahead of where the other three parts of it, and it's not sequential, right? They're being intermixed. So the visual problems are I think they're much more apparent, and they're also very different than what we saw on single screens. And then the third problem is called stepped tearing, which is not a very good name, but instead of, when you see vertical or horizontal tearing from VSync not being enabled, for example. Actually, if you go down to the next couple of images down, Burke, you'll see one's called stepped tearing, and it's got a green, yellow, and blue pattern on the side. Those lines are usually straight across, right? So it's a tear in the screen, but it's a straight tear. If you look at these lines, they're clearly not even. And as you see that white kind of area, it actually expands as it goes across the screen, which is also completely new, completely unique, and troublesome.
So is this, let me ask this, the kind of classic counter to this would be like, really? Can anyone playing these video games actually see this, Ryan? Or is this something that only shows up on benchmarks?
So what's interesting is about the way this benchmarks is we are actually capturing what is on the screen. So we are actually capturing what you are seeing.
Right.
Now, whether or not a person notices this is a different debate, right? And there are still people that say that they don't notice visual tearing from VSync very much, and there are people that are absolutely horrified by it. And I think there are a lot of people that, because those screenshots that we're showing you are single screenshots that are happening 40 or 50 or 60 times a second. So even though you may think you see something that looks weird, if you're not able to capture that, then you have no way to know what you were seeing or what you're looking at. If you're using Fraps to record video of your gameplay sessions, those anomalies do not show up. Because it's actually recording at the frame buffer level.
And we should also point out that SLI does not exhibit the same level of tearing issues in its implementation.
Correct. Yeah, this is really restricted to AMD and Eyefinity. And to AMD's credit, when they released that driver on the 1st of August that kind of fixed and addressed the issue in many cases for single display configurations, they said, look, it's not fixed in Eyefinity yet, and it's not fixed for 4K displays. And we knew that kind of going into the testing, but what was unique to me was that the problems are different for AMD with Eyefinity and 4K than they are with just standard single display monitors. So that's why I thought it was interesting. It was worth kind of showcasing what are these particular anomalies, and now we know what to look for going forward as they, attempt to introduce potential fixes or new graphics cards or whatever. And I think the other takeaway from this particular story, so your perceived frame rate is affected in the same way. You're seeing fewer frames at the screen than you would normally. So frame rates are affected negatively the same fashion as they were with single displays. But the 4K screens that you alluded to earlier that we have, they are essentially two monitors running in one structure, one case. and they are using Eyefinity or they're using NVIDIA Surround to function. So this same problem that exists for 3 panels would exist for the 2-panel Eyefinity configuration that is how current 4K 60 hertz panels are actually created. So it's not just a problem for people that are Eyefinity users, it's a problem for people that may have been looking to that that 4K upgrade path this holiday season. Right now we need to know, is AMD going to have this fixed today? For people, the answer is obviously no, but at what time frame are they going to have this problem actually addressed and fixed for users that are making, these are your highest investors. I don't, whatever you want to call it, right? These are people that are buying 2 $500 graphics cards and 3 monitors or a 4K monitor, right? And these are the people that they're definitely a minority, but they're also a vocal group, and they're the group that's, I think they're putting a lot of money into the ecosystem, and they deserve some, retribution for that, I think.
We get an interesting question in the chat room. Curtis B asks, how many frames are you typically seeing this in? Like 1 out of 10, 1 out of 100, 1 out of 60?
So it's interesting. Depending on the load of the game, if the game is running at a higher frame rate, you will see more of the visual tearing, the interleaving of these frames. And I would say 1 out of 5 frames, maybe. It's a fairly frequent occurrence for games that are not very, or that are very demanding on the frame rate, running a lower frame rate perhaps. The dropped frames is what you see more often. And the running theory that we have at PC is that there's a bandwidth or a sync issue for the frames to be copied from the secondary GPU to the primary GPU and then displayed on the screen. And the issue is that the frames are not making it in time for whatever reason, and thus they're not being displayed in the right order. They're not being displayed at all.
Hate it when that happens.
Yeah, I mean, it's an incredibly complicated issue. NVIDIA does not have these problems in Surround or in 4K. They have some other 4K issues, but they don't have this particular problem.
Right.
So it'll be interesting next week when we're going to visit AMD for their tech day, where they've publicly said they're going to talk about new products, is ask them, has this been fixed? And if it has, how has it been fixed?
That would be nice.
Yep.
So we know a little excuse me, something we know a little bit before AMD's next press day. They have confirmed the Hawaii GPUs will use the 28-nanometer process. Ryan Shrout was basically stumbled across an interview or searched out in a feral and dedicated manner, interview with AMD's Matt Skinner on... What's that?
No, I just happened to come across it. That's very accurate.
Anyhow, our man in Kentucky is on Forbes.com. There's an interview with AMD's Matt Skinner. Skinner says, another thing I can tell you is about the process node. This GPU is in 28 nanometer. Some have speculated that it was 20 nanometer, and it's not for a specific reason. At 28 nanometer for an enthusiast GPU, we can achieve the higher clock speeds and higher absolute performance, and says they are not targeting the $1,000 price range, at least not initially. Quote, they're coming in Q4. I can't reveal a price point, but we're looking at a more traditional enthusiast GPU price points. We're not targeting a $999 single GPU solution like our competition, because we believe not a lot of people have $999. We normally address what we call the ultra enthusiast segment with a dual GPU offering like the 7990. So this next generation line is targeting more of the enthusiast market versus the ultra enthusiast ones.
I just love new terms they create, the ultra enthusiast market. That target stance is really the same thing they've done for the last several generations, right? So when the 7970 came out, it was released at $649.
Right.
And then they eventually released the 7990, which was the dual GPU version of that, sold for initially $999. So their strategy is really the same, apparently, for the Hawaii series of GPUs. What's interesting there is that it's going to continue to use the same process technology, which is something we assumed based on the fact that 20-nanometer process at TSMC is behind schedule, and AMD was not delaying their products to wait for it. What that means is, well, it means that you don't get the inherent power benefits of going to a lower process node. And so I'm very curious to see how they've been able to increase performance from one GPU to the next while not making a drastically larger GPU running at drastically higher power numbers. Wow. They claim that they haven't done it in that very interview, that it's 30% smaller than the GK110, which is a giant GPU to begin with, and that they're going to have the best efficiency in terms of performance per square millimeter, which should equate to performance per watt as well, probably. So it'll be interesting to see, and by all indications, it will know sooner than later, I guess.
We wait once again with bated breath. Corsair's Carbide 33R quiet mid-tower case review. There's not a mid-quiet tower. They like the idea of a moderately quiet tower. So the Carbide series has 8 models, different sizes, shapes, and colors, mostly black, but the 500R is also available in white. The 200R, 300R, 330R, 400R, 500R, and the Air 540 high airflow cube case, which I believe we demonstrated and lusted over a couple, 3 weeks ago. Basically, Robotech takes a look up on PCPro.com at the Carbide Series 330R quiet mid-tower case, which is essentially packed with sound-absorbing material, gets its cooling options on, and has support for, quote, multiple extended-length VGA cards. And I got to say, I like the fact, 2 things that have won me over to this case already: no big glass door on the side and a big solid-looking door on the front, having recently had the door on a case just fall off in my hands.
Oh, that's not great.
I always find that frustrating. So 3, what are we looking at here? 1, 2, 3, 4 2.25-inch drive bays to get your SSD on. A whole bunch of room for your GPU cards. And is that 3 5.25-inch drive bays? Yes, it is, kids. And a big old pre-built-in screen on the fans. I like that so much.
The big draw to me to this particular series of cases is that they try. This is the case where they say, if you want it to be quiet, you can do these things and it'll be quiet. If you want it to be a high performance, you can do these things to make it high performance. That last photo on the first page, for example, shows the top of it. And that panel there has some sound dampening material on it. And it's if you are not looking for high performance, but you're looking for quiet, you leave that closed. However, that panel can come off and reveal, a typical mesh grating for you to apply fans and radiators to, and there's something like that on the side. And there's several areas where, they try to kind of give you the, both options. Now, obviously, when you do that, you're cutting corners one way or the other. So
or
it's not
adding expense.
Yeah, but this is only $100. This is a $99 case.
Oh, I gotta say that I hadn't gotten to the pricing yet, so I'm even more excited about it. It's kind of funny if you look on page 3 and you start digging all the way down to the bottom. They're doing some really smart things, like the power supply air intake has a filter held in place with magnets. That's a nice, simple, convenient feature that makes this. It's just I like smart, simple things that work together to make for a better case.
Yeah, and they've done a really good job with a lot of. Corsair. It seems like they make 100 different cases now. Yeah, and sometimes it's hard, even as somebody who sees a lot of them sequentially, to try to point out what differentiates them from each other, right? And this is definitely like the series that they were trying to say, hey, we can build a quiet case, but they didn't want to build one that was only for that. So they kind of were trying to give you some options, and it's a pretty nice build for, $99.
No, it's fantastic. It's interesting. I didn't realize those 4, what I thought were 2.5-inch drive bays are actually both 2.5-inch and 3.5-inch drive bays. They basically function both for the smaller and the larger hard drives, which is a clever little feature. And there's 2 pre-installed fans running at 12 volt. The fans generated 33.7 decibels. At 9 volts, 30.8. At 5 volts, 27.5 dBA, which is pretty quiet. That is
pretty darn quiet, yeah.
Quieter than most people sleeping. So,
yeah,
I'm impressed. For $100, that's a fantastic looking piece of hardware.
Yep.
You want to talk about the new Intel and Google Haswell-powered Chromebooks? Were you excited, or you were getting meh or enthusiasm?
I was meh about it, but I was surprised when we were doing our live blog of the keynote how many people were kind of eager for this announcement to happen. There have been rumors that it was going to happen, and they kept asking, when's Google going to get on stage? When's Google going to get on stage? And, so I've never been a huge fan of the Chromebooks. The idea of this this particular type of ecosystem of device, and it may be just because it doesn't fit my workflow and daily use cases.
The simplest way of putting it is the last generation of Chromebooks had everything Ryan Shrout wants in a laptop except for an operating system he's willing to use.
Yes.
You know what I mean?
Yep.
And then it's pretty obvious. Haswell effectively, gives you 50% more battery life. Anybody with half a brain that lives on a laptop is going to go, yo, I'm in. Bring me more battery life, same size battery, more battery life. I'm good. They're claiming like doubling the battery life. For some reason, I said 50% a moment ago, so I'd like to apologize to all engineer and marketing people working on the Haswell project. But it's kind of funny. Like, Google claims that 6 of the leading PC laptop manufacturers are now offering their own spin on Google's Chromebook. Further, the Chromebooks account for around 20% of the sub-$300 PC market, according to Google. And I'm wondering if maybe something that Ryan and I have been talking around for a couple of weeks, with the idea that all of a sudden $350 is kind of a price point for laptops again, and not netbooks, but actual fully functioning laptops that don't make you weep when you try to do things like type in Word documents or browse more than 4 tabs simultaneously. And I'm wondering if a large part of that is just to fight against the emerging Chromebook market, which I find it difficult to believe that it is a measurable percentage. Or at least as measurable a percentage as Linux. You think as many people are using Chrome?
No. I agree with you.
Okay.
I agree that it'd be hard to see that being the case.
Chromebooks account for around 20% of the sub-$300 PC market, says Google. But you notice they don't say what percentage of overall sales the $300 market is. I guarantee you it's smaller than you think. But
the sub-$300 PC market.
That's right up there with the sub-$50 phone market and the ever so popular over $7,000 monitor market. Those are just tightly combated.
They're smaller
fields.
than you might believe. Yes.
Smaller than I might believe. Bay Trail M-powered Intel NUC coming in Q1 2014 for $140. This could be the ultimate DIY server box, except for the fact that you got to pull your. My goodness, the tribbles are coming. You have to put all of your storage pretty much outside of it. The NUC DN2810 FYK will use Intel's new Bay Trail M Atom processor, which, unlike previous Atom processors, I've been infested. Ladies and gentlemen, there are tribbles on the set. Speaking of tribbles, finally got to see Star Trek Into Darkness. I don't want to talk about it.
Right.
Best use of a tribble, however, in a post-original Star Trek series. Hold that thought, young man. My children are with me, ladies and gentlemen. It's exciting stuff. This is cool. As you pointed out, Bay Trail actually doesn't suck in terms of performance. The NUC is an incredibly low-power form factor, and you're talking about 802.11 BGN, and a pretty basic bare-bones system that's a motherboard, processor, and an enclosure for like $139 MSRP, which means this system on a chip in an enclosure with a power supply will probably sell for close to $100. It's got a USB 3.0 port, 2 2.0 ports, an IR receiver, an analog audio jack, HDMI output, gigabit Ethernet, which means it could actually make a really nice home theater PC or DIY extender box. That's really cool.
It could do a lot of things, actually. So this is a NUC. It's actually the Intel Next unit of computing. It's a 4-inch by 4-inch device. That's the unit of size that they're kind of using with this. Now, the one I'm holding here is actually a Haswell-based unit. Brand new. It's just starting to ship now. We'll have a review of it pretty soon. But the idea is you can get a lot of computing in a small area. Now, this one's fairly expensive. It's $360 for the bare bones. And you've got to add an SSD, wireless if you want it, and memory. So you're talking $360 plus anywhere from $100 to $200 for an SSD, and another $25 to $50 for memory, depending on what speed and capacity you actually want. Now, obviously, the performance of the Haswell platform is significantly higher, but a potential Bay Trail M-powered Intel NUC for $140, and that includes all of your components as well. I would assume that would include storage. And if it doesn't, you're still talking about, it includes a SATA data port. And that would be really the only thing you would have to add. I don't know if it would even add, it would have one SODIMM slot. So you'd still have to add memory and storage to it, but you're talking about a $220 lower starting point. You can get memory for $20. You can get storage for 60, 70, 80 bucks if you really, know what you're looking for and what specifically you need. And the Bay Trail M is, as you mentioned, not a slouch in terms of performance. It's not high performance, but it's going to have a lot of use cases in small form factors.
And it's also it's funny. Like I've had an amp that was running 24/7 and a Intel Core, or basically Intel Core i7 920 that was running 24/7, and the closet these two boxes were in was the hottest room in the house by like 25 degrees. And in this case you're looking at a 7.5 watt TDP that's going to like idle at it'll effectively idle at nothing because it's going to throttle down, but like 4.5 watts, which is nothing in terms of the amount of electricity consumed in a typical home. It's awesome. This has a lot of potential to be a really nice home theater box, a server box. I'm excited. I'm excited. I want
the Nook. The Nook was kind of an underdeveloped product, in my opinion, in the first generation.
Right.
I think these successive ones are going to be a little bit more kind of well thought out, and I think people will start to find more uses for them. Like this Haswell one is a preview. It has a SATA port inside on the board. Now that's not useful in a case like this, but they're going to sell third-party, aftermarket cases and stuff. So there's potential for some interesting designs and what you can do with it.
I would like to see some more external storage attachment options. I'd like to see Lightning. I'd like to see an additional USB 3.0 port. I mean, the Haswell box has like 4 3.0 ports, and there are USB 3.0 drive enclosures that support multiple drives. But I'm excited. That's got a lot of potential. As somebody who's recycled a lot of notebooks into low power servers over the years, a 7.5 watt part inside of this box has a lot of potential. A couple more news stories before we go. NVIDIA Tegra Note tablet platform launches, $199 from EVGA and PNY. Essentially, this is an Android tablet white box from NVIDIA. No?
That's pretty much what it is. There are rumors about like NVIDIA selling their own tablet called the Tegra Tab, I think. Engadgets and The Verge were reporting on that over the last several months, based on some FCC filings or something like that. But it looks like what they're actually doing is they've essentially built this, and rather than sell it themselves like they have done with the Shield, that they're going to allow their partners to essentially rebrand it. I wouldn't even be surprised if the branding all over the device maintains the NVIDIA logo. But if you take that away, take the business side out of it, you're getting a Tegra 4 powered 7-inch tablet.
This is good.
With a 1280 by 800 screen,
Not bad.
Dual cameras, 16 gigs of storage with SD card, micro SD card slot, front facing speakers, which I think is a big deal.
Yeah.
A stylus option as well.
With
10 hours of
chisel and
HD video
brush tips.
playback. Yeah. And $199.
It's got potential.
Which is under the price of the lowest cost Nexus 7 by $40, I think.
And I asked NVIDIA for more information on the size and battery capacity, writes Mr. Shrout. Excuse me, size, weight, and battery capacity. Got a quick answer. 4,100 milliamp hours, and the entire device weighs around 320 grams. That's
like 10% heavier than the Nexus 7 and a millimeter thicker, 9.6 instead of 8.6.
You're not going to notice either one of those things.
I wouldn't think so.
No. I'll be curious to see whether or not it is polished. I'm assuming they're going to have a pure Android experience and not wrap any cruft around it.
That's part of their promotion is 100% Android with the latest version of the OS, right? So they're kind of verbally committing to frequent over-the-air software updates and getting up to the latest version of the operating system as soon as they can. What people want to avoid is the delays of phones over carriers, tablets over carriers. They've done a very good job with Shield keeping it up to date.
Right.
And they say they will do that with this tablet platform too.
Interesting. I'm I wait with bated breath. This is the second bated breath moment in the show today. Well, 190. I mean, it's kind of like the classic, serious tablet price point right now.
Yep.
Oh my goodness. One more before we go. If you're kind of curious about, obviously the big deal, we're going to let us encapsulate the iPhone announcement in 30 seconds or less. iOS 7 out this week. I haven't even decided what to think about it. I've only been using it for a couple days. Boy, it is certainly built around a flat design system. The performance seems reasonable. If you want to look at some really unhinged, and I say this with love and affection, benchmarking of the A7 processor. So if you're looking at the 5C, the 5C is essentially the 5 in a new enclosure. That's 80% of what's going on with the 5C. The 5S is the new super version with the A7 CPU. Anand over at AnandTech.com did a fantastic and comprehensive 13-page review of the iPhone 5S, including talking about
pages.
What's that?
And they're dense pages.
Yeah, I mean, and this is classic Anand. There is no cruft here. This is a cruft-free environment. But it's amazing. Some of the benchmarks you may or may not be familiar with, but he talks about the A7 system on a chip, what 64-bit really means, if anything, to the average iPhone user, and then gets serious into CPU performance with a lot of benchmarking, and a lot of benchmarking against pretty much everything freaking else on the market today. There's good stuff in here. And the A7 is, to use a highly sophisticated technical term, stupid fast. The only thing faster, like the Mozilla Kraken benchmark, the only thing faster is like the Intel Bay Trail. And it's considerably faster, but then again, the Apple iPhone 5S is considerably faster than the next fastest processor on the list. It's interesting stuff. Google Octane benchmark, BrowserMark 2.0, and then he keeps going on with looking at sort of just the difference, like iPhone 5S versus Bay Trail, GPU architecture, the motion processor. I got to say that iPhone 5S sounds like a fantastic phone. My partner in crime on Texilla, Veronica, is going to be... I don't know if she's actually going to wait online to elbow her way to a first-generation 5S, but the other interesting thing is there's been a lot of rumors online that there's going to be a very limited number of 5S's shipping, possibly due to parts availability or some subpart availability or some yield availability. And if you've been thinking about buying a 5S, all of the usual suspects and quite a few more have been seeded with iPhone 5S's, and the reviews are out, not just Anand, but David Pogue basically says, anybody who's been hating on the thumbprint reader, go suck wind. I think he has said it to go soak your head or jump in a river, but it was interesting to ZDNet. We were talking about this on Texilla. ZDNet, one of the ZDNet writers, did a great roundup of kind of cherry-picking the best commentary. Miriam from Engadget pointed out that they were hoping for better global LTE support. Mostly, though, people were like, really? You couldn't put a bigger screen on it? And several reviewers were just like, I expected some sort of generational elevation of design aesthetic in the new phone. And it's like, well, actually, you got that on the 5C, which is all candy-colored mayhemish like the new operating system. Yeah, there's just nothing more bizarre than... it was, I got to say, much more jarring than going... iOS 7 for me has been much more jarring than going to Windows 8 from Windows 7, which may sound insane, but it's me, and I'm going to stand by that statement. We should... Hey, let's take a moment to thank our sponsor this week's episode of This Week in Computer Hardware, ProXPN, and they want you to know there's a new ProXPN app for Android in the Google Play Store that supports OpenVPN. If you are a mobile user and you've ever wondered if your information is secure when you're attached to a Wi-Fi network, say in a hotel or a coffee shop, the answer is no. Unless you encrypt it using something like OpenVPN, using a tool like ProXPN, which, by the way, I want to mention is approved, officially blessed by the man himself, Steve Gibson. Do you want to tell me a little bit more about ProXPN and what's going on with the VPN situation, Mr. Shroud?
Absolutely. VPNs, virtual private networks. If you don't know what these are, you should really be paying attention, right? So ProXPN is a global VPN. It's a global virtual private network that works on almost any internet connection. It creates secure encrypted tunnels for all of your data, right? So any applications, web browsing, email, file sharing, IM, all that stuff. ProXPN keeps everything you do online hidden from prying eyes. So if you don't know what a VPN is, keep that in mind. It keeps it hidden from prying eyes, disguising things like your physical location and giving you access to any website or online service, no matter where you live or travel to. ProXPN offers complete online privacy through a 512-bit encryption tunnel. It works via OpenVPN and PPTP. It's your choice. You can use this to protect yourself against like your internet provider's 6 strikes rule, for example. You can keep your personal internet usage private at work. You can bypass internet filtering and blocked websites anywhere, bypass those geographical restrictions. ProXPN essentially makes your internet connection region-free, which is an added benefit to the security that you get with ProXPN. It has software that works on Windows and Mac, offers advanced controls, allowing you to select the programs and ports that you want to anonymously route through ProXPN servers. It also works with your iOS or Android device. As Patrick mentioned, there is a new ProXPN app for Android in the Google Play Store that supports OpenVPN. They have world-class customer support and, as you mentioned, Steve Gibson. He's there for us. So here's how you can get it. You go to proxpn.com/twit. For more information, you can read all about the features and details that I just gave you, and you can sign up there as well. Premium accounts are normally $9.95 a month or $74.95 for an entire year. However, we're so generous with you guys, and our sponsors are so generous that we have a special offer. Use the code TWICH, TWICH, to receive 20% off your lifetime of your new account. That's less than $5 a month on the yearly plan. If you're not satisfied, you can cancel within 7 days for a full refund. That's proxpn.com/twit and use the offer code TWICH. And we thank ProXPN for their support of This Week in Computer Hardware.
Thank you, ProXPN. Also, a shout out to the chat room. Caffeine Free Dave. Love the concept of the children changing the tires. Got an email from Sam about a cooler upgrade and potential issues. It's always good to think this through before you've got the case cracked open and the coolers sprawled out on your workbench. It says, hey, Twitch gang, only been listening for a couple of weeks, but loving it so far. Excellent. Welcome to the show, Sam. He's got 2 quick questions for you today revolving around CPUs and cooling. I recently built my first PC using an Intel i5 4670K, 8 gigs of memory, and a GTX 770. Awesome. I am currently using the stock Intel cooler running at the default clock speed. Not so awesome. However, I'm getting increasingly interested in overclocking. Aha. I've had my eyes on the Cooler Master Hyper 612, but I got a little freaked out when last week you had an email about a guy installing a third-party cooler and his CPU pins becoming bent. I didn't realize the CPU had to come off before installing a new cooler, which confused me a little. Are bent CPU pins something I should be worried about when installing a cooler? Also, is the Hyper 612 any good for overclocking in your opinion? If not, do you have any suggestions? Thanks for that. Keep up the fantastic work. Thank you, Sam. We should point out that, I have several dozen times in my life changed the cooler on a CPU without removing the CPU from the motherboard.
Yep.
It kind of all depends on how much of the thermal paste compound tape, whatever it is, that's mustard. In fact, a thinly ground mustard can work as a reasonable CPU cooler or thermal bridge.
I don't recommend it.
I don't either, but that was one of those moments when you're looking at French's mustard versus something that costs $9 a 2-ounce tube, and the mustard or other sort of, thing you would put on a hot dog outperforming it. It makes you think about what you're paying for in those little tubes. But the bent CPU pins happen when you get unlucky or when you're moving too fast or when you drop a CPU. A lot of the time, you can, take the cooler off, and if with your stock Intel cooler is going to be this little pink pad most likely that came from it. It's sort of a thermal tape instead of a thermal compound that reduces issues for Intel. It might be gray, it might be pink, but if you pull that off of the CPU and there's nothing, and all you see is clear shiny metal on the back of the CPU, get your alcohol swab, get your 90% isopropyl alcohol from the drugstore, put it on a Q-tip, put it on a cotton ball, put it on a corner of a rag, wipe it down to make sure there's nothing on there, and then install the new heatsink. Bent pins happen. They're less common than you think. Don't worry about that so much. If you have to pull the processor out, handle it by the edges. Use all of your fingers to hold it. Be casual and don't press too hard if you're scrubbing goop off of it. Use a solvent. What's that?
Yeah. I was going to say, I should point out, so he references that email we had a couple of weeks ago where the processor came out.
Right.
And I think maybe what got lost in that email was that he didn't pull the processor out on purpose.
Right.
It was one of those instances where the heatsink was stuck to the processor. And in AMD platforms still, it has a ZIF socket, a zero insertion force, and it pulled the processor out with it. Now he has an Ivy bridge, he has a Haswell processor, 4670, and those LGA sockets have that arm, right? So there's actually a part of the socket that holds the processor down.
Right.
So the likelihood, you'd have to pull the entire assembly off the motherboard to take the processor with you when you take the cooler off.
Yeah.
So I think you should be able to replace it without taking the processor out, which is
something I will say is I think, and I could be wrong, but I'm looking at an Xbit Laboratories. This particular cooler, the Cooler Master Hyper 612 PWM. This is a $170 cooler.
Whoa!
For that much, yeah. I think it's been discontinued on Newegg. There's a couple third-party vendors on Amazon. They're still selling it for $170. It's a big, badass ninja cool guy. My cooler is bigger than you kind of cooler, which is my polite way of saying this is not where I would start my overclocking experience. Because if I can keep, if I can do like massive overclocking using a $40 cooler with no problem, that's the direction I would point you in. There are a lot.
Yeah, I would pay $170 for any water cooler, air cooler unit at all. Like, if anything, spend $100 and get like a Corsair H80 or something, like one of those self-contained coolers. Those are good. The only thing I also point out is he doesn't mention what case he has.
Right.
If he's using the stock case, that's one of the ones where it has the push pins, right? So you don't have to have access to the back of the motherboard to install anything. With these add-on coolers, you will have to have access to the back of the motherboard. So hopefully your case has one of those cutouts on the back plate, the back panel part, where you can access the back of the processor socket without having to take the motherboard out of the case. Because if you have to do that, that's a huge pain in the butt. Because now you have to disconnect everything. You have to take out all your graphics cards or whatever, and physically pull the motherboard out of the system to change the cooler. So check your case on that too.
Yeah, hardwacp.com has a lot of good cooler reviews. I haven't. I've done things where I've gone from a $40 CPU cooler to. I was going to say, do we need to call a medic? In case you couldn't hear that at home, there was a giant sound of a crashing ladder, not with my child anywhere near it, thankfully.
Good.
But I've been in situations where I've been overclocking and took like a $180 water block attached to a pump, attached to a car radiator, comparing that to like a $100 pre-assembled water cooling system, comparing that to air coolers, and man, $30 air coolers can pretty much pull almost as much heat off as the ridiculous $260 car radiator pump heat block contraption. So I would start with something less expensive. Thermalright is in a bunch of my boxes. I definitely do recommend leaving the stock Intel cooler behind, because the stock Intel cooler is designed to do the bare minimum of cooling to make the part operate in most environments. And it's going to do it loudly, and it's not going to do it particularly well. It will do it. It will run forever, at least until the motor runs out. But I would definitely agree with upgrading. I would not spend $180 on, like Ryan said, on anything. To cool my CPU.
You need to be really serious about that stuff.
And I want to say, like we were joking kind of about mustard before, except that, here it is. Hardware Secrets has done a lot of great cooler reviews. And I will say also does mayonnaise last as a thermal compound? Back in 2011, they updated this in June 28, 2013. Back in 2011, we tested mayonnaise as a thermal interface between the CPU and the base of the cooler. And let me drop this into the rundown so that Bert can see it real quick and share it with everybody. But Hardware Secrets has done some really extensive thermal compound testing. And it's like, amazingly, mayonnaise worked nicely, proving to be, in at least a short term, a better thermal compound than several well-known commercial products. But at the time, we could not determine how long it would continue to work before degradation in performance was noted. This time, they ran a long-term test to determine if mayonnaise can last as a thermal compound. It's so awesome. But they've done I don't think they've done one since like 2011, but they've done several comprehensive thermal compound reviews. And It's pretty funny stuff, but I'm bringing this up because when people start doing overclocking, people start spending a lot of money because they want to make sure their CPU survives. And it's like Intel or AMD have already made sure your CPU is going to survive. They basically set it up so that it hits 100 degrees Celsius and it throttles everything down even before it gets to 100 degrees Celsius. It wants to, you try to take that processor over 100 degrees Celsius, it's going to shut the computer down. It's not going to hurt the processor. It's not going to hurt your motherboard, but it's going to be like, nope, night, we're done. And that's great, having fried computers in the past. Wow. I'm just looking at a picture of the base of a cooler after running on mayonnaise for 12 days. And you should go to hardwaresecrets.com/article/does mayonnaise last as a thermal compound to see that picture for yourself, because I love what they're doing. Oh, Burke.
Ugh.
Burke.
Ugh.
I was trying to save everyone. So
gross.
So mayonnaise apparently lasts about 24 hours before it starts to break down as a thermal compound. But, thermal compound does make a difference in performance on a cooler. It probably makes considerably less than you would think based on people's enthusiastic endorsements. Ryan just got that look on his face like, man, I hate you guys.
I don't use mayonnaise on my PCs. That's all I'm saying.
No, and that's just, whew, I think foul is a good word for that.
I bet it smelled wonderful.
I bet it smelled wonderful.
I bet it smelled wonderful.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. You don't need to spend all the money. I will say that Cooler Master's got some pretty cool, pre-configured water block systems, and I will say we've seen, $30, $25, $30. I want to say $30 probably coolers outperform $150, $200 coolers. So do your homework. Read the reviews on hardwarecp.com, Hardware Secrets, some of the other websites that are looking at this. Don't spend all the money on thermal compound. Don't spend all the money on a fan. Do feel free to get your crazy on with overclocking. It's fun and slightly addictive. And if you completely lose your mind and suddenly find yourself making strange creations out of copper to hold liquid nitrogen because you want to start challenging the world record on benchmarks, take pictures, send them to us. We'll share them with everybody.
Before photos. Make sure you get some before photos.
This is what my computer looked like before the giant frost ball.
Yeah.
Cooley's got a question about gaming monitors. He says, hi, what are the top gaming monitors out there? What specs should you look out for? And what is supposed to be the right screen size? I like your podcast, although at times some of the stuff is quite advanced for me right now, but I'm learning thanks to you. Well, thank you, Cooley. The first rule of gaming is game on whatever you got. The second rule of gaming is a bigger monitor with more resolution is always better.
Correct.
That's one of the reasons we've spent a number of weeks talking about the Yamazaki Cat Leap, these WQXGA, boy.
I have no idea. We go through this, I think, every week. The reason I like 4K is because it's UHD. Right? To go with that.
The 2560 by 1440 monitors we've been talking about up on eBay. Monoprice is their own branded version of it. It's essentially a 27-inch high-resolution monitor. That's a real sweet spot. You can get those for like $350 online. If you want to get into serious gaming, people are looking for the 120 hertz flat panels. And it's kind of a toss-up right now whether you want like a 120 hertz flat panel or wait for the super high-end 4K panels that run faster than 30 hertz, because the cheap 4K panels right now are running at 30 hertz, which is not an optimal gaming experience. Fine for Blu-rays, fine for web video, sucktastic if you're PC gaming.
It's really bad for just computing in general too. I've found just mouse movement is very odd and awkward at 30 hertz. And I'm assuming, if you want to spend $3,000 on a monitor, the Asus PQ321Q is awesome. But I know that not very many people want to spend $3,000 on a monitor. Yeah. I didn't want to spend $3,000 on a monitor, and
you own 24 monitors, maybe 27 monitors,
and I own a lot of monitors.
2 4K monitors, and he doesn't want to buy them.
I'm not impartial to buying more displays. I would say so. I have to be honest. I don't spend a whole lot of time on 20 hertz panels, but from a lot of enthusiasts, if you're going to stay in that 1080p range, I really think the debate today is, do you want to get a 1080p 120 hertz panel or do you want to get one of these 2560 by 1440 low-cost panels? Those monoprices that you mentioned sell for $390 from monoprice. So you don't have to buy from a random seller on eBay that's shipping to you from Korea. You're buying from a company that I've used tons. I know you have used tons. They have a warranty. They're going to support it. You know, I met with the CEO and the buyer of all these displays, and they're very confident that they're doing the right thing. And $390 is a little bit higher than what you're going to pay on eBay, but I think that kind of safety net you have is definitely worth it. $390 for a 27-inch 25 by 14 monitor is a pretty awesome deal. And if you have a 1080p panel or less today, the increase in just brilliance you will see in a monitor like that is going to be pretty stunning right up front. You know, the jump for me from a 25 by 14 to 4K is just as stunning. But if you're going from a 1080p or lower to this, it's going to be pretty awesome. If you look around and you start to read some forums, you may find that some of these Cat Leap Yamakasi monitors can be overclocked to higher refresh rates, which can, you know, help bridge that gap between getting a 60 hertz to like 80, 90, 100 hertz. That's obviously go at your own risk type of thing, but it's interesting to look at. We were just talked about overclocking with processors. You can overclock with monitors and get some pretty good results out of it as well. For me, if you're somebody who's interested in gaming today on PC, I would probably go for those 25 by 14 panels.
I got to stop down to cut something in. You're not looking for Cat Leap on monoprice.com. You're looking for 27-inch WQHD. If you search for monitor on monoprice.com, the first one you get is 27-inch IPS glass panel Pro LED monitor WQHD.
WQHD. That's what they're going with.
And those are actually, they're up a little bit. No, yeah, those are $450. I think the regular ones are $390 now.
Yeah, they have several ones. They have several different models now. You can get ones that have a built-in scaler so that you can have other inputs than a single DVI connection. And then I think they have like actual 30-inch 25 by 16s as well. So if you just go to like their Pro IPS LED monitors, you know, they've got their IPS, which is great too. So they have a 390. Two of them for $390, and then they're listed under PC gaming accessories. They sell some mice and stuff too, so take that for what you will. But they've expanded out, and it's pretty cool stuff.
It is cool stuff. That's about it for this episode of This Week in Computer Hardware. Anything exciting coming up on PC Per this week?
So this week's going to be interesting. On the 25th, which is a Tuesday, right? It is no, I'm sorry, it's a Wednesday. On next Wednesday, check back at pcper.com/live. We're going to be having at least a live blog, maybe a live stream of the AMD GPU announcement. Whatever it's going to be, it will be happening next week in Hawaii, actually. And they're going to be live streaming it. I believe they're going to be live streaming it so people can see the announcements as we see them. And then I'm going to have a live blog where we can have commentary on what they're talking about and what they're actually showing right there. So that's kind of the big deal for next week for us, is what's AMD going to actually announce. We're going to have a review of the Haswell Nook that we showed off a little bit earlier. We'll have a review of next week. Corsair has another new case that is coming out, a little bit bigger in the Obsidian line. And Ken's going to do some. I think Ken is going to be waiting in line tonight for one of those iPhone 5S beasts as well. So we're going to see if we can break one of those.
If he thinks about it, tell him to get two.
Okay, we'll do.
Honey, I have to buy it. Ken stood in line all night for me. I'll be divorced by next week. That's it for this edition of Twitch This Week in Computer Hardware. And I do want to point out, actually, we had a lot of fun in Texel this week. We talked about earplugs to prevent hearing damage, but audio file quality ones. So when you're going to a concert, you can actually hear the cool stuff that you actually want to hear. And some interesting discussion about how long data lasts on an unplugged hard drive, because we got a lot of people are like, hey, if I unplug a hard drive, put it in a safety deposit box or my safe, how long is the data going to last? The answer is possibly not nearly as long as you'd like. Texilla.com is the site for that. It's good stuff. Yeah, and that's it for this edition of Twitch, This Week in Computer Hardware. If you haven't heard the show before, welcome. And do us a favor, head over to twit.tv/Twitch. You can find all of our back episodes and information on how to email us. But I'm just going to tell you the email part right now. Twitch, that's TWICH at twit.tv. And if you can find us on Twitter, well, you can find us on Twitter. Just go to @Patrick Norton or @Ryan Shrout. And that is it for this edition of @Twitch. I'm @Patrick Norton.
I'm just Ryan Shrout.
man. All right, that's it for this edition of Twitch. We'll see you next week.